So we start recognizing our habitual ways of moving away from vulnerability. One is always being on our way somewhere else, having a job, having a project, thinking that our life is up ahead of us. You know, that feeling of kind of leaning forward, so we're tumbling into the next moment versus really being here. We do that in a lot of ways. One of the emotional layers that usually covers over a deeper vulnerability is anger, blame. So just these are flags of dragon scales. If you are checking to sense what's your particular style of armoring, blame and anger is one of them. Depression's another. We depress or push under the vulnerability. Again, these are each ways of doing it. And then in relationships, a lot of it is one person's way of covering over vulnerability will be to grab onto and pursue and hold on to another. And another person's way of getting away from vulnerability will be to push away. And that's one of the classic dances. Jules Pfeiffer put it the best. He has a couple that are in their dance, and she's saying, "But I love you." And he's saying, "Don't you threaten me." You know? So that's one way that we cover over with our emotions. Another way that we do it is mentally, where we have this kind of chronic judging going on. If there's chronic judging underneath, that's vulnerability. Now sometimes the judging's of other people, but often it's this relentless inner critic. And if you really ask that judging place, well, what would happen if I stopped judging? Underneath that's a deep fear that I'll never get what I want, I'll never be the person I need to be accepted and safe. Very deep. There's these internalized messages that we have about what's wrong with us that we keep playing are part of our armoring. So for some, the vulnerability might be really, really strong, and you need a healer, therapist, teacher, somebody to keep you company, ways to create some distance, to go at it really slowly. For other people, much more direct contact, just the way we're exploring with the breath, where you just start to feel it and breathe into right where it is. But make sure with the out-breath, the sense of space that's inside and around. So I'll give you an example of how that can work, how Rilke says everything in some way is helpless and wants our love, and how we can begin to sense the vulnerability that way and really bring a loving presence. And the example I want to give you is a woman I've known for a very long time, and about 10 years ago, she was in the thick of a real, very painful season with her daughter, who had been addicted to heroin for years and was in and out of treatment centers. And their pattern was that she would go and get treatment, and then she'd relapse, and then she'd go to her mother, and her mother would take her in and help her, again financially, and get her back into another treatment center, and then she'd leave, be okay for whatever months, and something would happen, and it just kept recycling. So the armor, this woman, the mother's armor, really was how to keep control. And the way she would keep control was she would either try to manage her daughter's life, or be really angry and blaming at her, and then go back to managing it again, anger and blame. But she kept hands on. She couldn't disengage, and she kept trying to save her, and it didn't work. So finally, she saw that she was contributing to her daughter's suffering by participating the way she did. That's what it took. And that's when she had to, Rumi says the word surrender, be ground. That's when she had to let go of her activity, her scales, which really were to control things, and just feel the pure vulnerability of, I'm helpless. I can't save her. She might die, and I have to live with that uncertainty. Now, I'm sure there are people listening right now, that know what that's like with somebody we love, where we know we can't manage it and we have to live with the fear and the grief of what's happened and could happen. And for her, it was like unplugging a bottle. As soon as she just let go of doing and managing and trying to save her daughter, what surged up was the enormity of the fear and the grief she had been kind of pushing away. And she wept for weeks. And her practice was over and over to meet that edge of this enormous ocean of grief and then just soften and just be porous enough to let it move through her over and over again. There was, after many, many weeks, still fear and still grief. It's not like it goes away, but there was this enormous presence and tenderness that had opened up. Because when we stop running from vulnerability and we open, what we discover is our openness. And when we offer presence, what we discover is our presence. So the uncomfortableness is there, but it's swimming and unfolding in a very vast kind of presence. And for her, she was much more resting in her wisdom and her heart. And she, at that point, could relate to her daughter in a very different way, which was, rather than blame, tremendous compassion. But it wasn't what's called idiot compassion, where you just drop all boundaries. It was wise compassion, where she was very boundaried. And her daughter was on her own, and she totally loved her, both. Now that is a lot of maturity, but she grieved right to the, when you've really, really grieved a lot, your heart's wide open because there's nothing left to lose. So she had grieved it. She had gone into the vulnerability that deeply. So this story has a happy ending. And I say it that way because it doesn't always work out. In this case, her daughter, she believed somewhere in her daughter that there was that wisdom, that Buddha nature that was going to pull her through. And her daughter came through, and they actually, they're very, very close. It might not have gone that way, but it was still, she was serving herself and her daughter as best as she could by opening into the vulnerability and letting go of all the control, all the scales that she had been living with. So the training, just to kind of summarize, is that when we sense that soft spot, to begin to notice our scales, and as much as we can, to recognize them and in some way allow ourselves to lean in. And sometimes the leaning in really requires reaching out a bit and sensing the love and the support that's around us.